When I turned 69 last Tuesday, I spent the entire morning preparing what I thought would be a celebration dinner. The aroma of my famous pot roast filled every corner of my modest Chicago apartment, mixing with the scent of fresh-baked apple pie cooling on the windowsill. I set the dining table with my grandmother's china, the same set I'd used for every family gathering for the past 40 years. The morning had started beautifully. I'd woken up at dawn, feeling more energetic than I had in months. The October. Sun streamed through my kitchen windows as I carefully seasoned the roast with the secret blend of herbs Robert had taught me during our early years of marriage. I hummed old jazz standards while peeling potatoes, remembering how my late husband used to dance with me in this very kitchen while dinner cooked. I'd called Sarah 3 times the week before to confirm everyone would be coming. "Of course, Mom," she'd said each time, though I noticed a strange hesitation in her voice. "David's really looking forward to it. The kids can't wait to see you." Michael had been equally enthusiastic when I spoke to him, promising to bring his famous garlic bread and telling me how much his teenage daughter Emma was excited to hear my stories about her grandfather. By 6 o'clock, the food was ready. By 7. I was checking my phone for missed calls. By 8, I was staring at 5 empty chairs around a table that suddenly felt enormous. Not my daughter Sarah, not my son Michael, not even my grandchildren showed up. The silence was deafening, broken only by the tick of the old grandfather clock in the hallway and the distant sounds of Chicago traffic filtering through my windows. I tried calling each of them. Sarah's phone went straight to voicemail. Michael's did the same. Even little Emma's phone, which she usually answered within seconds, was silent. The anxiety in my chest grew with each unanswered call, transforming from concern to genuine fear that something terrible had happened to them. As I sat alone, picking at the cold mashed potatoes, my phone finally buzzed. A text from my son-in-law, David. "Sorry, Eleanor. Something important came up at work. Rain check? Rain check. On my birthday." After 43 years of never missing a single family celebration, I was getting a rain check. I stared at the message for a long time, reading it over and over, trying to understand what could possibly be more important than the woman who had welcomed David into our family with open arms 10 years ago. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came when I decided to throw away the leftovers and heard voices from the apartment next door. Through the thin walls of our old Lincoln Park building, I could clearly hear my daughter Sarah's distinctive laugh. Then Michael's deeper voice telling some animated story, then the unmistakable sound of children playing and Emma's teenage giggle. They were all there, just 20 feet away from me, having their own gathering while I sat alone with a table full of untouched food. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. These weren't strangers who had forgotten my birthday. This was my family, the people I'd raised, loved, and supported through every triumph and tragedy. I pressed my ear against the wall, listening to their joy while my own world crumbled. But as I stood there in my empty kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a celebration that never happened, something else began to grow inside me. Something I hadn't felt in years: determination. The kind of fierce resolve that had gotten me through Robert's illness and death, through raising 2 children as a working single mother after he passed. The next morning, I would discover something about David that would change everything, and my quest for answers would uncover a web of lies that went deeper than I ever imagined. Hey there, I'm curious. Where are you watching this story from? Also, if you're enjoying this emotional journey, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Trust me, you won't want to miss what Eleanor discovers next. The morning after my forgotten birthday, I decided to take my usual walk to clear my head. Living in Lincoln Park has its perks. The lakefront path always helps me think, and the sight of Lake Michigan stretching endlessly toward the horizon usually brings me peace. The crisp October air bit at my cheeks as I walked past the familiar brownstones and tree-lined streets where I'd lived for over 30 years. But as I rounded the corner onto North Cleveland Avenue, I froze. There was David's silver BMW parked outside Mercy General Hospital, the same hospital where he claimed to work late shifts as an administrator. The car was unmistakable. Sarah had shown me photos of it when they'd bought it last year, proud of what she called their first real luxury purchase. Something about seeing it there didn't sit right with me. David had told us repeatedly how demanding his schedule was, how the hospital administration required him to work unpredictable hours, often well into the evening. It was his excuse for missing family dinners, for not being available when Sarah needed help with the kids, for their constant financial struggles despite what should have been a decent salary. Curious, I walked into the hospital's main entrance, past the gift shop filled with flowers and get-well balloons. The lobby was bustling, with visitors, patients in wheelchairs, and medical staff in scrubs. I approached the information desk, where an elderly volunteer with kind eyes and silver hair smiled at me warmly. "Excuse me, I'm looking for David Morrison in administration," I told her, trying to keep my voice casual. "I'm his mother-in-law, and I wanted to surprise him for lunch," she typed on her computer, her fingers moving slowly across the keyboard. After a moment, she frowned and typed some more. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We don't have anyone by that name working here." "Are you sure about the department? Perhaps he works in a different capacity?" My blood ran cold, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Could you check all departments, please? Maybe he's in a different division?" After several minutes of searching, checking multiple databases, and even calling her supervisor, she shook her head apologetically. "No David Morrison employed at Mercy General, I'm afraid. We've been very thorough. Is it possible he works at a different hospital in the system?" I thanked her and walked back outside, my mind reeling. If David wasn't working at the hospital, where had he been going every day for the past 3 years? And why would my own daughter lie to me about it? The questions multiplied in my head like a virus, each one more disturbing than the last. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before in my life. I followed someone. I felt like a character in one of those detective movies Robert used to love, except this was my real life, and the stakes felt impossibly high. I borrowed my neighbor Mrs. Peterson's old Honda Civic, telling her I needed to run errands, and my car was making strange noises. David left their modest house in Wicker Park at exactly 2 p.m., just like clockwork. I followed at a safe distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Instead of heading toward any hospital, he drove downtown, navigating the busy Chicago streets with the confidence of someone who'd made this trip countless times. He parked outside an upscale office building on LaSalle Street, in the heart of the financial district. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place where successful professionals worked. I watched from across the street as he walked through the revolving doors with the easy stride of someone who belonged there. I waited a few minutes, then approached the building directory in the lobby. Morrison and Associates law firm occupied the entire 15th floor. My son-in-law, who supposedly struggled to pay bills and borrowed money from Sarah regularly, who claimed to work hospital administration shifts, owned a law firm in one of Chicago's most expensive business districts. The brass nameplate by the elevator read, "David Morrison, Senior Partner, Personal Injury Law." Below it, smaller text listed several associate attorneys and support staff. This wasn't a small operation. This was a substantial legal practice in the heart of downtown Chicago. I sat in the borrowed car for 2 hours, watching the building, trying to process what I'd discovered. The modest apartment he and Sarah shared, the constant complaints about money, the borrowed funds from my savings account over the past year. It was all an elaborate lie. But why? What possible reason could he have for deceiving not just me, but his own wife and children? As David emerged from the building around 4:30 p.m., talking animatedly on his phone, I rolled down my window slightly to catch his conversation. What I heard made my blood freeze and confirmed my worst suspicions. The inheritance situation is under control. The old woman suspects nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. David's words echoed in my mind like a broken record. The inheritance situation is under control. The old woman suspects nothing. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice again, casual and confident, discussing my life as if I were already dead and buried. What inheritance was he talking about? My late husband, Robert, had left everything to me when he passed 5 years ago. Our savings, the small portfolio of stocks he'd carefully built over 40 years of work, and the life insurance policy that had allowed me to live comfortably in my retirement. I'd always planned to divide it equally between Sarah and Michael when my time came, just as Robert and I had discussed many times during his final months. I got up and made myself a cup of chamomile tea, my hands trembling as I waited for the water to boil. The digital clock on my microwave read 3:17 a.m., but sleep seemed impossible. I pulled out Robert's will and our financial documents from the filing cabinet in my bedroom, spreading them across my kitchen table under the harsh fluorescent light that made everything look stark and unforgiving. Everything seemed in order at first glance. The documents were exactly as they should be. The will naming me as sole beneficiary, the bank accounts in my name, the investment portfolios we'd built together over decades of careful saving. But as I studied the papers more carefully, something caught my attention. 3 months ago, someone had accessed my safety deposit box at First National Bank. The signature looked like mine, but I hadn't been to that bank since Robert's funeral, when I'd placed his wedding ring and some family photographs in the box for safekeeping. The access log showed not just my signature, but also a second person listed as an authorized representative, my daughter Sarah. When had I authorized Sarah to access my safety deposit box? The signature was definitely mine, but I had no memory of signing such authorization. The next morning, I dressed carefully in my best navy blue dress and walked the 6 blocks to First National Bank, where I'd been a customer for over 25 years. The morning air was crisp and filled with the scent of autumn leaves, but I barely noticed the beautiful fall day. My mind was focused entirely on getting answers. Margaret Williams, the branch manager who'd known me since Robert and I first opened our accounts, greeted me with her usual warm smile. But when I explained why I was there, her expression grew concerned and slightly confused. "Mrs. Chen, I remember that day clearly. Your daughter Sarah came in with you about 3 months ago. You seemed a bit confused, if you don't mind me saying. Sarah explained that you were having some memory issues and that she was helping you manage your affairs. She had all the proper documentation." My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of her desk. "Margaret, I've never had memory issues. My mind is as sharp as it's ever been. I wasn't here 3 months ago. I would remember something that important." Her face paled, and she immediately pulled up my account on her computer, typing rapidly. "But you signed right here, and Sarah had your power of attorney documents notarized and everything. She said you'd been forgetting appointments and having trouble managing your finances." Power of attorney? I'd never signed any such documents in my life. Robert and I had discussed it during his illness, but after he passed, I'd never seen the need to give anyone else control over my affairs. I was perfectly capable of managing my own money and making my own decisions. "Margaret, I need to see that security footage from that day," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Something is very wrong here." It took 20 minutes for her to locate the footage, and when she finally pulled it up on her computer screen, I felt like I was watching a nightmare unfold. On the grainy black and white screen, I watched a woman who looked remarkably like me, wearing my favorite blue wool coat and the gray hat Sarah had given me for Christmas, entering the bank with my daughter. But as I studied the footage more carefully, squinting at the screen and asking Margaret to replay it several times, I realized the truth was far worse than simple identity theft. The woman walking beside Sarah wasn't just someone impersonating me. She was my identical twin sister, Margaret, whom I hadn't spoken to in 15 years after our bitter falling out over our parents' estate. Margaret and I had been estranged. Since our mother's death, when she'd accused me of manipulating our elderly parents into changing their will to favor me. It wasn't true. I'd simply been the daughter who stayed close to home, who visited daily during their final years, who held their hands through illness and grief. But Margaret had never forgiven me for inheriting the family home and the majority of their savings. The same sister who'd sworn revenge against me at our mother's funeral, standing by the graveside and telling me through tears of rage that she'd make me pay for stealing what was rightfully hers. I'd thought her words were just grief-talking, the anger of someone who felt guilty for moving across the country and missing so much of our parents' final years. Suddenly, everything made horrible sense. The family gathering next door on my birthday, David's lies about his job, the forged power of attorney, and now this elaborate scheme to steal my inheritance. They weren't just excluding me from their lives. They were systematically erasing me from my own life, using my own sister as a weapon against me. I sat in my car outside the bank for nearly an hour, my hands shaking so violently I couldn't start the engine. The magnitude of their betrayal was overwhelming. My own sister Margaret, my beloved daughter Sarah, and my son-in-law David had formed an alliance against me that was both sophisticated and cruel, beyond anything I could have imagined. The October afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as I tried to process what I'd learned. This wasn't just about money, though clearly that was a major motivation. This was about revenge, manipulation, and a level of deception that required months, perhaps years, of careful planning. They'd been watching me, studying my habits, forging documents, and building a case against my mental competency that could potentially strip me of everything I held dear. But I needed concrete proof before I could take any action. What I'd discovered so far was circumstantial. Suspicious, certainly, but not enough to prove criminal intent. If I was going to fight back against my own family, I needed evidence that would stand up in court. That evening, I did something that went against every moral fiber of my being. I decided to break into Sarah's apartment. The decision didn't come easily. I spent hours pacing my living room, looking at family photographs, remembering the little girl who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories, the teenager who'd call me crying about boy troubles, the young woman who'd ask me to walk her down the aisle when Robert was too sick to do it himself. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. Someone naive who hadn't yet learned that the people you love most can also hurt you the deepest. I knew they'd be at David's office building that evening, for what Sarah had mentioned were their weekly financial planning meetings. Sessions I now understood were actually strategy meetings for their theft. They were predictable in their routines, which would work in my favor. Using the spare key Sarah had given me years ago for emergencies, I slipped inside their modest Wicker Park apartment just after 8 p.m. The familiar scent of Sarah's vanilla. Candles filled the air, and for a moment, the normalcy of it almost broke my resolve. This was the place where my grandchildren played, where I'd spent countless Sunday afternoons, where Sarah had cried on my shoulder after her miscarriage 3 years ago. But as I moved through the apartment, turning on lights with trembling fingers, what I found there made my stomach turn with a combination of nausea and rage. Boxes and boxes of documents with my name on them were stacked in their bedroom closet. Copies of my bank statements going back 2 years, my medical records from my doctor's office, and most disturbing of all, fabricated psychiatric evaluations, supposedly documenting my deteriorating mental condition. The forged medical reports were shockingly detailed and convincing. They described incidents of confusion, memory loss, and paranoid behavior that had supposedly occurred during doctor visits I'd never had. The handwriting looked authentic, the letterhead appeared genuine, and the medical terminology was sophisticated enough to fool most people. Someone had invested significant time and money into creating this fictional narrative of my mental decline. But the most devastating discovery was a letter in Sarah's unmistakable handwriting, addressed to Sunset Manor Nursing Home on the North Side. The letter inquired about their memory care facilities and included a detailed description of my deteriorating condition and increasing inability to care for myself safely. They weren't just planning to steal my money, they were preparing to have me committed to a facility where I'd have no control over my own life. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to retake several shots. Each document I captured felt like another nail in the coffin of my relationship with my daughter. In one folder labeled Phase 2, I found architectural plans for a luxury home in Naperville and vacation property in Miami Beach. They were literally planning to use my inheritance to fund their dream retirement while I rotted away in a nursing home. The cruelest part was a timeline they'd created, mapping out the stages of their plan. Phase 1 had been gaining access to my financial accounts and beginning to siphon money gradually. Phase 2 involved having me declared mentally incompetent and committed. Phase 3 was the complete liquidation of my assets and the purchase of their new properties. As I prepared to leave, carefully putting everything back exactly as I'd found it, I heard the unmistakable sound of keys jingling outside the front door. Panic surged through my entire body like electricity. They were home early, and I was trapped in their apartment with incriminating evidence of their scheme photographed on my phone. I quickly moved toward the bedroom, looking for a hiding place. The closet seemed like my only option, though the irony of hiding among the very documents that proved their betrayal wasn't lost on me. I squeezed behind Sarah's winter coats, clutching my phone to my chest and trying to control my breathing. Through the thin closet door, I could hear their voices clearly as they entered the apartment. Sarah sounded tired and stressed. "I can't. Keep doing this, David. Lying to Mom, pretending everything is normal when we're literally planning to destroy her life. She raised me, she loved me unconditionally, and this is how I repay her?" David's response was cold and calculating. "Sarah, we've been over this. Your mother has more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes, and she's getting older. We're not destroying anything. We're being practical. The nursing home called back today. They have an opening next month. Once she's declared incompetent, we can move forward with the property transfers." "And if she starts asking too many questions before then?" Sarah asked, though her voice lacked conviction. "Margaret will handle it. She's been practicing being your mother for months now. No one will suspect anything when she starts acting confused. In public, the bank employees already believe Eleanor is having memory issues. I had to get out of there, but as I tried to move deeper into the closet to avoid detection, my foot knocked over a shoebox filled with what felt like papers. The crash echoed through the apartment like a gunshot, and I knew immediately that my presence had been discovered. If you're enjoying this incredible story of betrayal and justice, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Eleanor's fight for justice is just getting started, and you won't believe what happens next. What was that? Sarah's voice carried through the apartment like a whip crack. I could hear her moving toward the bedroom, her footsteps quick and nervous, on the hardwood floors. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard, I was sure they could hear it from the living room. I pressed myself deeper into the closet, surrounded by Sarah's clothes that still smelled like the expensive perfume I'd bought her last Christmas, back when I thought she was the daughter I'd raised with love and values. Probably just the building settling, David replied, but his tone suggested he didn't believe his own words. These old Chicago apartments make all kinds of noises. Remember last week when we thought someone was on the fire escape? No, David, this was different. This sounded like something fell. I could hear her moving closer to the bedroom now, and I realized with growing horror that I was trapped. There was nowhere to go in the small closet, and if they opened the door, they'd find me crouched among their winter coats like some pathetic burglar. My phone, clutched in my sweaty palm, suddenly vibrated with a text message. I'd forgotten to put it on silent mode, and though the sound was barely audible, in the deathly silence of that moment, it might as well have been a fire alarm. The soft buzz seemed to echo off the closet walls, and I watched through the slats. In the door as David's head snapped toward my hiding spot. "Sarah, call the police. Someone's here." His voice was different now, harder, more dangerous. This wasn't the charming man who'd won over our family with his easy smile and apparent devotion to my daughter. This was someone capable of elaborate deception and cruelty. Someone who could plan to destroy an elderly woman's life without a hint of remorse. I burst out of the closet before they could call anyone, clutching my phone and trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. The bedroom suddenly felt impossibly small with all three of us in it, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. No need to call anyone, David, though I think the police might be very interested in what I've discovered here tonight. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face draining of all color when she saw me. For a moment, she looked exactly like the little girl who used to run to me when she'd broken something, hoping her mother's love could somehow fix everything. Mom. What? Are you doing here? How did you get in? The same way I apparently got into First National Bank 3 months ago, according to your friend Margaret, I said, holding up my phone to show them the photographs I'd taken of their documents. Though I seem to have trouble remembering these visits, don't I? Amazing how memory problems can be so selective. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the Chicago traffic outside, the distant sound of a train, the ticking of the old clock in their hallway. Everything except the sound of my daughter or son-in-law trying to deny what I'd discovered. Finally, David stepped forward, and I could see his lawyer instincts kicking in. His expression shifted into what I recognized as his professional mode, calm, controlled, and utterly without warmth. Eleanor, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You seem confused about what you've found here. These are just financial planning documents, nothing more. Confused? The word came out as a bitter laugh that surprised even me. The only thing I'm confused about is how my own daughter could betray me like this. Forging medical documents, identity theft, planning to have me committed to a nursing home while you steal everything your father and I worked 40 years to build. Tell me, Sarah, which part of this elaborate scheme was your idea? Sarah's composure finally cracked completely. The tears came all at once, and she collapsed into the chair by her bedroom window, sobbing like a child. Mom, you don't understand. We were desperate. David's law firm has been losing money for 2 years. We're drowning in debt. The kids need so much for school, and we thought you'd never miss the money. You live so simply, and you're getting older, and we just needed help. So you decided to steal my life? To erase me completely and let your Aunt Margaret take my place? The pain in my voice surprised even me. This wasn't just about money. This was about being erased, being declared incompetent, being locked away like an inconvenient problem while they lived in luxury on the fruits of Robert's and my life's work. David's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the calculating person he'd been hiding beneath his charming exterior. Your sister approached us 6 months ago, Eleanor. She said you'd stolen her inheritance years ago when your parents died, that you'd manipulated them into changing their will. She felt you owed her compensation for what she lost, and frankly, we agreed. This wasn't just about our financial problems, this was about justice. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with sickening clarity. Margaret had been planning this revenge for 15 years, waiting for the right opportunity and the right allies. She'd found them in my desperate daughter and manipulative son-in-law, people who could justify their actions by convincing themselves they were righting old wrongs while solving their own problems. Justice? I repeated, my voice growing stronger with anger. You call stealing from an elderly woman justice? You call forging medical records and planning false imprisonment justice? What you call justice, David, the courts will call felony, elder abuse. And Sarah, I turned to my daughter, who was still crying. What you call desperation, I call the worst kind of betrayal a child can commit against a parent. I moved toward the door, knowing I needed to leave before the situation escalated further. But as I reached the hallway, Sarah's voice stopped me. Mom, please don't do this. We can work something out. We can pay everything back. The kids, Think about Emma and Tommy. This will destroy them. I turned back to look at my daughter one final time, seeing not the woman she'd become, but the little girl I'd rocked to sleep. The teenager I'd stayed up all night with when she had pneumonia. The bride whose hand I'd held when she was scared about getting married. Sarah, you should have thought about Emma and Tommy before you decided to destroy their grandmother's life. They deserve better than parents who would steal from family. 3 months later, I stood in the packed courtroom in the Richard J. Daley Center in downtown Chicago, watching as Judge Maria Martinez read the verdict that would determine the fate of my family, or what was left of it. The November morning was gray and cold, matching the somber mood that had settled over all of us during the lengthy legal proceedings. Sarah sat at the defendant's table between her court-appointed attorney and David's high-priced defense lawyer, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She'd lost weight during the trial, and her hair, once her pride and joy, hung limp and lifeless around her face. David maintained his professional lawyer composure, but I could see the defeat in his eyes. The realization that his elaborate scheme had not only failed, but had cost him everything he'd worked to build. My sister, Margaret, who had flown in from Phoenix for the trial, sat in the back row, avoiding my gaze entirely. She looked older than her 69 years, worn down by months of legal proceedings and the weight of her own choices. The sister I'd once shared a bedroom with, played dolls with, and confided my deepest secrets to had become a stranger driven by 15 years of resentment and jealousy. On the charges of elder abuse in the first degree, conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and attempted false imprisonment, I find all 3 defendants guilty, Judge Martinez announced, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. The gavel's bang echoed like thunder, final and irrevocable. The months since discovering their betrayal had been the hardest of my life, but also the most empowering. With the help of Rosa Gutierrez, a brilliant young Latina attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases and had taken my case after reading about it in the Tribune, I'd built what she called an absolutely airtight case. Rosa had been relentless in her pursuit of justice, uncovering financial records that showed exactly how much money David had already stolen, and digital evidence that proved the extent of their planning. The evidence I'd photographed that terrifying night in Sarah's apartment became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. But Rosa had gone far beyond that. She'd tracked down the graphic designer who'd created the fake medical records, found bank employees who'd been uncomfortable with the suspicious transactions, and even located witnesses who'd seen Margaret practicing my mannerisms and speech patterns at a coffee shop near my apartment building. The defendant's actions represent one of the most sophisticated and cruel elder abuse schemes I've encountered in my 20 years on the bench, Judge Martinez continued. The emotional trauma inflicted on Mrs. Chen, combined with the calculated nature of this conspiracy, demands the full weight of the law. David received 5 years in federal prison and was permanently disbarred from practicing law in Illinois. His law firm, already struggling financially, collapsed completely when news of his conviction became public. The luxury lifestyle he'd been trying to maintain through theft had cost him not just his freedom, but his professional reputation and any hope of recovery. Margaret received 3 years in federal prison, plus full restitution of the money she'd helped steal. At her age, 3 years felt like a lifetime, and I could see in her face that she understood her quest for revenge had destroyed what remained of her own life. The sister who'd felt cheated by our parents' will had ensured she'd never benefit from any inheritance at all. But Sarah's sentence hurt the most. 2 years in minimum security federal prison, followed by 5 years of probation and community service. As she was led away in handcuffs, she finally looked directly at me for the first time since the trial began, mouthing the words, "I'm sorry, Mom," through her tears. Outside the courthouse, Rosa put her arm around my shoulders as reporters asked questions and cameras flashed. The story had attracted significant media attention. partly because of the sophisticated nature of the scheme and partly because it highlighted a growing problem of financial abuse targeting elderly Americans. "Eleanor, you've done something incredibly brave," Rosa said as we walked down the courthouse steps into the cold Chicago air. "Your case has already inspired changes in banking protocols for elderly customers and raised awareness about elder abuse in families. 3 other states have contacted us about using your case as a model for stronger elder protection laws." She was right. My story had been featured not just in the Chicago Tribune, but in newspapers across the country and on national television, news programs. I'd received hundreds of letters from other seniors who'd experienced similar betrayals, many of whom found the courage to speak up because of my case. Several had contacted Rosa about representing them, and a support group for elder abuse survivors had formed at my local community center. 6 months later, I sold my Lincoln Park apartment and moved to a beautiful senior community in Evanston, called Sunrise Village. The community wasn't about hiding from life. It was about embracing it with people who understood the value of independence, dignity, and genuine connection. My new apartment had large windows overlooking Lake Michigan, and I could see sailboats in the summer and ice formations in the winter. I now volunteer 3 days a week teaching financial literacy classes to other seniors, helping them recognize the warning signs of financial abuse and protect themselves from family members or strangers who might try to take advantage of them. The classes are always full, and I've developed a reputation as someone who understands both the emotional and practical aspects of these devastating betrayals. My grandchildren, Emma and Tommy, visit me regularly now. They'd been kept completely in the dark about their parents' scheme and were devastated when they learned the truth during the trial. Emma, now 16, has been attending my financial literacy classes and wants to study law like Rosa. Tommy, 13, still struggles with understanding how his parents could have done something so terrible, but we're working through it together, with the help of a family therapist. Last Tuesday, on my 70th birthday, I hosted a dinner party for 12 wonderful people I'd met at Sunrise Village and through my volunteer work. The dining room in the community center was decorated with fresh flowers and candles, and the table was full of laughter, stories, and genuine connection. My new friend Helen, a retired teacher, had baked me a chocolate cake, and Margaret, not my sister, but a delightful widow from Ohio, had organized a surprise photo presentation of all the seniors I'd helped through my classes. As I looked around, at these amazing people who'd chosen to be part of my life, I realized something profound about family and belonging. These friends knew my story, understood my pain, and celebrated my strength. They showed up for me not out of obligation or blood relation, but because they genuinely cared about my well-being and valued my friendship. The evening was perfect in a way that family gatherings had never been. There was no underlying tension, no hidden agendas, no one keeping score of old grievances. Just people who had decided to create chosen family based on love, respect, and mutual support. Sometimes the most painful betrayals lead us to the most beautiful new beginnings, and sometimes at 70 years old, you discover that you're not just stronger than you ever imagined, but that the best chapters of your life might still be ahead of you. Family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up, caring deeply, and choosing each other every day. The legal victory had been important, but this room full of genuine love and friendship was the real justice I'd been seeking. Please subscribe and like this video if this story touched your heart. Stories like Eleanor's remind us that it's never too late to fight for justice, find new family in unexpected places, and discover strength we never knew we had.